Nick stood on the small balcony of his third-floor apartment and listened to the city breathe. Street lights pooled like tired suns. A delivery truck sighed as it rolled past. Far below, a couple laughed on the sidewalk. The sound narrowed into something distant and tender, then vanished. He cupped a coffee in both hands, though it had long gone cold. The numbers on his phone glowed. The banking app revealed the small, stubborn truth he refused to look at. He'd had worse months. He could list them like scars: the internship that paid nothing, the layoff in 19, the car engine that died 2 days before his rent was due. But tonight felt different. A pressure that wasn't simply arithmetic. It was the slow, gnawing realization that momentum wasn't coming back unless he broke the pattern. Another one? Maya asked from inside the kitchen, voice muffled. She was his neighbor and sometimes friend, the kind of person who brought lasagna leftovers to lonely roommates and also asked harder questions at midnight. "Just thinking," Nick said. He closed the app. "About a budget. About everything." Maya stepped out and leaned against the balcony rail. She was in her late 20s, teaching at the community college, eyes that recognized people before they finished sentences. "You read my mind, or at least my bank account." She smiled, then softened. "You okay?" He shrugged. "I'm 30. I want to stop being terrified by my checking balance." She laughed in a way that wasn't cruel. "That is a very reasonable goal. Want to hear something that changed my head? There's this silly number, 20,000. All of a sudden, you can breathe." Nick met her look. 20,000. Yes, emergency fund for 3 to 6 months. Makes you dangerous in a good way. She tapped her phone. "I read about it, the way your brain changes when you have a cushion." He thought of the rent invoices, the student loan notice, the sudden dumb costs that showed up like weeds. He thought of the freelance audio editing gigs that dried up when a big client went remote. He had ambition. He had talent. But ambition never paid January's bills. "Okay, give me a plan." Maya grinned like a coach. "Start with small rules. Track everything. Treat saving like a bill. And stop buying almond milk lattes you don't need." He swore he'd stop. He hadn't yet. For 6 months, Nick did what he'd never let himself do. He kept a ledger. Not a vague, "I'll save more" promise, but a hard truth written in a spreadsheet. Rent, utilities, groceries, subscriptions, debt. He subtracted, trimmed, negotiated. He sold an old guitar he hadn't played in years. He accepted a back-end audio editing gig that paid little but came with consistent hours. Maya gave him a stack of frugal recipes and a wink whenever he wavered. The ledger began to move in the right direction. Small numbers added to small numbers. The phone notification light that used to bring dread now offered a quiet flutter of possibility when transfers hit his savings account. But then the alarm, literal and metaphorical, went off. On a Thursday morning on his way to a recording session, his phone rang. The clinic on the other end had a voice he didn't want to hear, an unpaid balance from last year that had been misfiled. The number made his chest tighten. It was not catastrophic by itself, but it exposed how thin his surface was. He replayed every recent decision with a cold clarity. He called his mother. He told her the number, clipped and blunt. She said nothing at first. Then, "You'll figure it out, honey. It's what you do." He also thought of walking away money, the thing Maya had said, and realized he didn't have it. He could not quit a job that made him miserable. He could not take the creative risk he coveted. He felt the old panic, that reflexive shrinking. For one day, he wanted to go back to the person who accepted the highest offer just to sleep easy that night. Instead, he tightened. At the end of the month, the ledger read $1,200 transferred to savings. Not a fortune, but momentum. That night, Nick dreamed about a boulder on a slope, an image from something he had read. He pushed with every inch of his arms, sweating, breath ragged. Every month, another shove. It was an odd ritual. On the last Friday of every month, Nick allowed himself one small indulgence: a cheap cinema ticket, a secondhand record, a friend's cheap dinner. It was a token to keep the discipline from souring into penance. He'd learned to be forgiving with small pleasures. On a warm Saturday in late spring, a text arrived that felt like a betrayal. His old college friends were catching a weekend getaway: beach, bonfire, a rent-free house. "You should come," the message said. "You deserve it." He stared at the photo of their grinning faces. The caption shimmered in glossy, spend now colors. He wanted to laugh and go and forget the formula and leave the spreadsheet behind. He pictured himself on a boardwalk, the salt in his hair. For a beat, the ledger dissolved. Then his savings app flashed: $14,800. He closed his eyes. The number was a promise and a test. The friends texted again. "You in?" His thumb hovered over the reply. He imagined the trip, then the loan payment that would be due in 2 weeks, the rude little emergency that could break the month. He typed, "Not this time. Maybe next year." The reply came almost immediate. "Bummer. We'll bring you photos." That night, Maya brought over leftover lasagna and a bottle of red wine. They sat cross-legged on the floor. "You did the right thing," she said, handing him a plate. "What if right is boring?" Nick asked, fork poised. "What if all the saving just makes me old and careful and dull?" Maya watched him. "What if it makes you free?" He nodded, but the voice that spoke that night was quieter. Freedom sounded like delayed gratification in a cheap lasagna container. He forced a smile and kept saving. The number climbed: $17,200. Nick began to sense the first rumble of change. He moved through life with a little more slack in his shoulders. He began to say no at work when a manager asked for late deliverables that would have been free overtime. He negotiated one small raise. He worked mornings on his passion, composing short scores for independent filmmakers. The projects were small and rarely lucrative, but each one was a proof. Then an email arrived: an investor meeting with a former colleague, Jared, who wanted to pitch an app for local musicians. Jared needed someone to help with sound design and a small seed investment. He wanted $5,000 to move forward. Nick felt his heart skip. The app sounded promising. A clever marketplace, a way to connect local studios with artists. If it succeeded, the upside was real. At the same time, he remembered the clinic's letter, the engine of his anxiety. He remembered every late rent, every time a card bounced, the humiliation. He ran the numbers slowly, carefully. If he committed $5,000, his savings would drop to $12,200. The cushion would be smaller, but he'd be investing in an opportunity. He weighed the chance of missing out against the chance of losing personal safety. Maya came over. He described the meeting in his mental seesaw. She listened, then said, "If you put money in, will it change your life even if it fails?" He thought, possibly, in the way some failures teach better than successes. It could, he admitted. Then don't put money in because of FOMO. Put money in only if you can still sleep if it goes away. They both sat in the quiet that only two people who had budgeted in their 20s could share. Nick slept poorly. He saw an image, the boulder again, smaller, rolling slightly down the other side. He imagined the app thriving. He imagined the app failing, and he imagined that if it failed, he'd be back at square one, day wishing he had the freedom to take risks without destroying his life. He made a decision. On paper, he wrote, "Preserve $20K. Invest only if savings remain greater than $20K. The next day, he declined Jared's offer. He wrote a polite message, offered to help in a contractor role for a lower fee, no equity, so he wouldn't lose capital. Jared replied with disappointment and a promise to call if they needed him. Nick didn't know if he'd made the right call. He'd felt the sting of regret for a few days, but in the following weeks, something odd happened. He slept better. He stopped copying the worst-case scenarios in his head and began to map opportunities.
Autumn wrapped the city in a copper light. The ledger moved with a steady click. The transfers were regular, sometimes small, sometimes larger. Nick began to notice new things. A landlord he'd once thought untouchable said yes to a small request because he'd asked confidently. A producer cast him in a stable contract because he'd quoted a number and stood by it. Confidence changed how people treated him. On a cool November morning, Nick scrolled his phone and exhaled like a held breath. The savings account read $20,004. The extra $4 felt like a coin dropped onto the floor of a cavernous secret. He sat down hard at his kitchen table. His hands trembled. He went outside and walked to the neighborhood park where kids shrieked on swings and an old man read the paper. He breathed in air that tasted like end of something and beginning of something else. "You look like you won a war," Maya said when he called her. He laughed. "Feels like one," he said. Maya came over with 2 paper cups of coffee and sat opposite him on the stairs. They didn't say anything important at first. The world felt politely different, like a photograph corrected for color. "So what now?" she asked. Nick folded his hands. "I don't know. I know I don't want to go back to living paycheck to paycheck." "For sure," she said. "But remember, this is a foundation, not a crown." He nodded. He thought of the car payments he'd rejected, the nights he'd delayed gratification, the times when he'd believed possibility was a luxury. That morning, opportunity was not a mirage, but a map. He started to make a list, an investment account, a small emergency fund in a liquid account, and a deliberate plan to put the rest toward creative projects. He spent the next week with fierce, focused gentleness. He opened an index fund account, he set up automatic contributions, he continued to do the client work he enjoyed, but now he did it from a place of negotiation and self-respect. He said no more often, and when he said yes, it was because it fit the life he was building. Small things began to happen. An index fund dividend arrived and nicked at his balance in the most ordinary way. $12 here, $18 there. A friend's band asked him to compose a short score for a local show. He took it and quoted a fair price. A producer offered him a 6-week contract that let him work mornings on his music and evenings on the project. The money came in regular streams, not torrents, but it came. More importantly, Nick changed. People who'd known him as anxious and available began to comment on a steadiness. At a neighborhood coffee shop, the barista asked, "You different lately?" He laughed. "I don't know yet. Maybe I'm just older." Maya shook her head. "It's not age. It's not even the money. It's the permission money gives you to be what you wanted to be." One evening, Jared came by. The app had launched in an early version they were testing. Jared looked haunted with hopeful energy. We could have used you," he said quietly. Nick smiled. "You did great." Jared brightened. "Do you want in? We're raising a small bridge round." Nick paused. He'd learned to check the ledger not for fear, but for possibility. He looked at his investments, his cushion, his plan. He made a small, deliberate decision and invested a modest amount. Not a risky gamble, but a stake that aligned with his goals and didn't compromise his safety. The app did well enough to get attention. Some quiet success followed. Jared sent him a message 1 year later. "Your small contributions made a huge difference." A small, generous truth. 2 years later, Nick stood on a stage in a small theater where the band he'd helped score played under low lights. He watched people cry at the right places in the music he'd written and felt something rare, the satisfaction that comes from work that matters to others. After the show, a producer offered him a longer contract. He took it, on his terms. He also had a relationship again, not because money had bought it, but because money had bought him time to be present and honest. He dated someone who loved long bike rides and quiet mornings. They would sometimes split toast and talk about a life that included travel, not out of necessity, but by choice. He didn't become a billionaire. He did not buy a new car. He kept his old Honda because it made sense, and because the logic of opportunity had taught him to value what would compound. He bought himself modest luxuries, a slightly better microphone, a weekend trip to a film festival, not to signal status, but to fuel creativity. And then, one clear spring morning, Nick opened his accounts. The combined investments and savings had begun to tilt the scale in small but clear ways. Dividends and compound returns provided a regular, growing baseline of income. He called his mother. "You sound different, Nick," she said. "You sound like someone who can breathe." He smiled.
I am. He thought back to his first nights on the balcony, to the clinic letter, to Jared's invitation that almost broke him. He thought about the ledger, the humble acts of restraint, the steady, sometimes painful discipline. He thought about the way Maya had shown up with lasagna and blunt, practical truth. "What would you tell your younger self?" his mother asked. "Not to panic every time the card declined," he said, "and that the small things add up." "Anything else?" "Yeah," he said, "that 30 doesn't mean you failed. It means you're finally building something you can keep." Nick's story did not end with a lottery ticket or a movie-style windfall. It ended with a quiet, broad sort of wealth, the mental freedom to take risks that mattered, the ability to sleep without a cliff of dread, the confidence to say no and mean it, the chance to pursue creative work with steadier margins. He had reached a threshold, $20,000, that was less about the number and more about what it proved, that he could plan, sacrifice, and build. On a rainy afternoon, he met Maya in the same park where he'd celebrated the first time. She'd been offered tenure at her college. He'd been offered a chance to produce a short film. They sat with new, settled smiles and watched a child chase an orange balloon. "You did it," Maya said. "So did I," he replied. She raised her coffee cup to being boring, apparently. "To being free," he corrected. They clinked paper cups the way two people who had learned to value the big decisions over the micro anxieties do. The city moved around them, indifferent and generous in equal measure. When he later gave a talk at a local meetup, he wanted to help others with what he'd learned. He said in a voice steady with the weight of experience, "The number is less important than the habit. You don't get lucky. You build a life where luck can occur." A young man in the crowd raised his hand. "How do I start?" Nick smiled, thinking of the nights of spreadsheets and lasagna and declined trips. He said, "Start with tracking. Then protect a small cushion. $2,000 to breathe. Keep going until you can survive 3 months without income. Then you'll see the world differently. Then the choices will be yours." Outside, a wind pushed through the trees. It felt like a promise, not of riches, but of options. Nick had lost some things along the way. Easy nights, impulse pleasures, short-term thrills. He'd gained a patient, quiet freedom. The kind that lets you fail and try again. The kind that turns small, ordinary months into a life with meaning. He closed his eyes and heard briefly the sound of a boulder finding its roll. Not a runaway avalanche, but a steady, unstoppable movement forward.